And welcome back, folks, to Truth versus News for May 20th here. We all kinds of action. This is the second hour, and we've got lots of things happening. How about let's start off by investigating the investigators, see what needs to be found out, what the truth is. Let's go for
it. You got it, Don. And here are a group of, those who are manipulating our election right there in the White House. And this is really fascinating about how the Russians have been exercising so much influence over America. Meanwhile, Barr is working with the CIA and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. It's pretty fascinating to discover that Durham is only looking at the gross intelligence activity prior to the 2016 election. He's not looking at the DOJ, FBI corrupt activity surrounding the Mueller probe, Rod Rosenstein, corrupt current FBI officials or agents, corrupt investigative outcomes and cover-ups that occurred during the 2017 and 2018 James Wolfe, etc. Regardless of disposition, career DOJ and FBI officials, Mueller staff, for example, will remain safe under this limited review. Keep this in mind. So it's really fascinating what's going on here. The introduction of Durham can be asked, what was going on with John Huber from Utah for the past couple of years? He was previously assigned to assist the Office of Inspector General Horowitz in November 2017. So why is John Durham now assigned to Horowitz, seemingly doing the same thing? The answer is not complex. Originally, Horowitz was assigned on January 12th, 2017 to review issues related to the DOJ and FBI regarding improper conduct in advance of the 2016 election. That original mandate that led to two investigations reports. One, leaks from the FBI, Andrew McCabe outlined, then two, overall DOJ FBI investigative bias and political outcome. Midway through these investigations, November 2017 is when Huber was assigned to assist. In March 2018, while two avenues of investigation were ongoing at the request of AG Sessions, the Office of Inspector General opened a third review, potential FISA abuse. So in March of 2018, Horowitz had three investigations underway. A month later, April 13th, he released his IG report on McCabe. Now he's down to two. On June 14th, he released the IG report on DOJ and FBI misconduct and bias. Now the only remaining investigation is the FISA review. This is when any visible activity by John Huber ends. It makes sense Huber would end in around June 2018 because Horowitz had an easily manageable, albeit important, singular review down to one case. Huber's review of other issues related to Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation is nearing completion too, sources say. A criminal referral on McCabe for leaking to media was sent to U.S. Attorney Jessica Liu in April of 2018. The criminal review looks as though it was dropped about 6 months later. Around the same time, criminal DOJ operation for SSCI leaker James Wolfe was executed in October of 2018. Yes, I'm saying criminal cover-up carried out by the DOJ to protect the multiple institutions of government. Throughout 2018, simultaneous to the Mueller probe's ongoing corrupt effort, career officials within the institution of the DOJ and FBI are transparently working with an agenda to protect the interests of the institution. Career mid-tier officials and investigations, as many as 40 FBI agents working for Mueller, for example, remain embedded despite the top-tier findings and resignations. A month after Wolfe was protected by a plea deal, a month after McCabe was seemingly protected, and the same month Rosenstein provided Mueller with the second scope memo authority to target Mike Flynn Jr., the midterm election was held. The morning after the election, Trump fired Sessions. Mid-November 2018, corrupt DOJ FBI embeds remain in place. Mid-November 2018, Trump does not appoint Rod Rosenstein acting attorney general. Without a week, November 14th, 2018, the OLC guidelines that Jeff Sessions, former chief of staff, now acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker, can oversee the Mueller-Weissmann probe. In order to bring Attorney Durham into the picture, go back to the October 2018 timeline. DC Attorney Jesse Liu does not charge Wolfe. DC Attorney Jesse Liu appears to drop the criminal referral of McCabe. Later, McCabe goes on a book tour. When and where was a criminal referral of FBI legal counsel James Baker sent? October 3rd, 2018, lawyers for James Baker informed Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows, their client, has been under investigation. So the referral of Baker was sent outside D.C., likely done quite a while ago. Status unknown. While it would be false to say Durham has been investigating the origin of the Russian collusion conspiracy investigation, he obviously has been involved in the investigative perimeter of events, so one can presume he has a solid frame of reference. This is interesting, too. Who was the CIA Deputy Director of the National Clandestine Services for Foreign Intelligence and Covert Actions over Europe while John Brennan and Peter Strzok were running their European 2016 counterintelligence operations? That would be current CIA Director Gina Haspel, strongly suggesting she's supporting the investigation with her inside knowledge. Bottom line, this Barr investigation could end up with accountability, or this Barr investigation could unearth so much institutional corruption and gross malfeasance, Barr will stand at a podium and duplicate recent events. Time will tell. Scott.
Well, we're seeing that these people in the Department of Justice and the CIA have simply thought that by executing actions through triplicate paperwork and filtering them through their cronies, that they have acquired and achieved an air of formality and legitimacy, and therefore they can't be questioned. And that's completely false when fraud and deceit and corruption and obstruction of justice are the primary motivators behind their actions. And I think that is what Trump needs to get at, and he is, that the motivations of these people were for fraud and corruption and cover-up, and that all things that flowed from those motivations were fruit of the poisonous tree. That's why they can't. That's why everything essentially that they prosecuted and tried to prosecute Roger Stone and Manafort and all these people for are ultimately fruit of the poisonous tree, because they emanated from complete fraudulent and inappropriate motives. So Trump is exposing these people little by little. Jim?
Michael J.
Thank you. You know, they never thought she would lose, Jim. And the reality is they had so many things to cover up. They had so many things to distract us from her email scandals, from her treason concerning what they intentionally accomplished against Chris Stevens, and what they did in in Libya and in Syria, and also in the Ukraine. So much treason, so much involvement at the highest levels of government with pedophilia, with Pizzagate, with celebrations in the White House with hot dogs and pizzas, which actually were code for having little boys and little girls in sex parties in the White House under Obama. So much to cover up. And the media was involved. Why? Because at the highest levels of the media, they are also implicated in this, or else they would be exposing it. But the demoralization of America has always been the way that the enemies of America sought to destroy her, to bring her down. And so CIA involvement with Brown stoning, Israeli Mossad involvement with getting people in compromising positions and using blackmail. All these things were part of what was standard operating procedure under Obama and Clinton. And the deep state denizens are still there doing their slow walking and doing their obfuscation and their outright deception operations. That what we are looking at is that what we see is miracles happening right now, because the American people have been finding out here a little, there a little. They've been finding out where to kind of lift up the carpet and see what was shoved under the carpet. Uranium One is not going to go away. Okay, the things that Scott was exposing with the Birkenfeld shell game corruption and hijacking of billions of dollars worth of hidden assets in those central banks. And what Birkenfeld revealed, showing how that the Democrat Party was actually operating a huge criminal enterprise that was international and involved financing terrorism. All these things are not going to go away. And why? Because the American people will not allow it to go away. Jim?
Thank you. Thank you, Michael J. We have a nervous Clapper claiming we don't need another investigation of the investigators because he's a guy who's going to be in the hot seat. You're going to have to stand in line and take a number to do an investigation of the investigators, said Clapper. There's a substantial investigation, which, as I understand it, is nearing completion by the Justice Department Inspector General. I'd wait for the outcome of that to determine if there needs to be more investigations. The CNN anchor asked about Barr's newly appointed investigator of the origins of the Russia probe. Then Clapper shifted stance, repeated the old mantra that Mueller has denied in his report. We're kind of losing sight of what was the cause of all this. The predicate for all this was the Russians and the dozens of occasions where Russian operatives tried to engage with the Trump campaign. The Russians were attacking the U.S. election system on a rather massive scale through the social media, through RT. That was a profound threat to our entire election system and still is. People should pay more attention to volume 1 of the Mueller report and what the Russians did. We're losing sight of that, ignoring the fact that there was no Russian hacking, that it was a leak by Seth Rich, who was disillusioned as the IT guy supporting Bernie Sanders, at the way Bernie Sanders' campaign was being sabotaged, and that the chief executive officer at Google has testified to Congress that the total amount the Russians spent to influence the election was $4,700 during a $1 billion contest. It was a drop in the bucket of no significance. We know there was a foreign nation influencing our election, but it was not Russia. Meanwhile, Roger Stone has asked the judge to suppress evidence against him because it was improperly obtained. Stone lawyers wrote in a filing that because federal prosecutors said they will not need to prove that Russians were behind the hacks of the Democratic National Committee or the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, or that Russia gave hacked materials to WikiLeaks, any search warrants issued asserting those scenarios took place were approved on an inadequate basis. Roger Stone is 100% correct. Read Greg Jarrett's magnificent book, The Russia Hoax, if you have any doubt, or watch my video, The Russia Hoax Comes Apart at the Seams, on 153news.net. Roger Stone is completely in the right. Meanwhile, a bombshell has been blacked out. Obama accepted at least 21.6 million in foreign donations in the 2012 re-election. According to reports circulated at the highest levels in Washington, former President Barack Obama's political campaign received at least 21.6 million in illegal foreign campaign contributions during the run-up to the 2012 presidential election. U.S. Justice Department announced Friday that Malaysian businessman Low Tuok Jo and former Fugues rapper Parakras Michael have been charged with conspiracy after allegedly funding tens of millions of dollars to Obama's campaign fund. According to David J. Harris, as you're probably aware, foreigners and foreign companies are forbidden by law to contribute to political campaigns. They are especially not allowed to funnel $21.6 million from foreign donors to a campaign. The feds indicted Press Michael, a rapper for the group The Fugues, on Friday for funneling tens of millions to the 2012 Obama re-election fund. Joe Low was indicted last year on conspiracy charges related to a scam from which he'll be facing charges that he bilked investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars. Low provided the money to Press Michael. Meanwhile, Tulsi Gabbard says she'd drop all charges against Assange and Snowden, the one candidate the Democrats have in the field who's worth a tinker's damn. In the midst of an interesting and wide-ranging discussion on the Joe Rogan experience, Democrat Congresswoman and presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard said that if elected president, she would drop all charges against NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Rogan noted that Sweden's preliminary investigation of rape allegations has just been reopened, saying the U.S. government can't stop that. And Gabbard said as president, she dropped the U.S. charges leveled against Assange by a Trump administration. Not surprisingly, the videos of this interview have disappeared. Yeah, Gabbard said when asked to clarify, she's also saying she'd give Edward Snowden a presidential pardon. And I think we've got to address why he did the things the way he did. And you hear the same thing from Chelsea Manning. How is there not an actual channel for whistleblowers like them to bring forward information that exposes egregious abuses of our constitutional rights and liberties? Period. There was no channel for that to happen in a real way, and that's why they ended up taking the path they did and suffering the consequences. I think she's doing a great job. Scott.
Well, Tulsi Gabbard is saying all the things we've been saying she should be saying because they're the right things. They're the truthful things. And if Trump was smart, he'd be saying them first, or he'd be returning to them. But instead, she's the only one saying it, and that's the only thing that's going to resonate in the hearts and minds of the American public, and we're going to win the domestic election by winning the hearts and minds of the independents, the middle-of-the-road people who make up their minds the last 2 weeks of the election. Never forget that. They make up the election. The last 2 weeks, the people who don't have an ideology, don't have a party, vote according to their feelings, they will determine the election. And anti-war and getting America out of these conflicts will be their primary trigger point. Tulsi Gabbard will be the Democrat leading contender because of that position, because everybody else is about reparations against white people, confiscating guns, blah, 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 environmental fanaticism. They have no chance. So Tulsi Gabbard's in a good position. The other thing I always have to laugh at, Jim, because of James Clapper and Michael Hayden and John Brennan and all these people, the whole Russia hoax, the whole Americans working with Russian intelligence started in 2012, but it really climaxed in 2015 when I came out and spoke on Paul Preston's Agenda 21 radio, and I won't go into a lot of the details, but there was a lot of international calls to Mr. Preston about me saying, is this guy real? Is the story real? And they double checked on everything. And then I started going on Russian television and being interviewed and telling the truth, telling the whistleblowing truth about what was going on with Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation, Saudi Arabia, Swiss banks, the massive shell game at the State Department, and Russian television was the only one who published it. Press TV, Iranian television, the only one who published it. I went on some other networks, Sputnik and elsewhere, and it was after all of that that this Russian American operatives working with Russia started coming out. So I think the origins of this have to really go back and say all of these lies that Clapper and these other people are trying to generate about there was real Russian interference. There was not. There were Americans telling the truth that was being published on Russian television, and the deep state was listening to the Russian television and instantly started to reverse engineer a false Russia hoax based on people like me who were Americans, including others, including Julian Assange and others, who were all interestingly zippered up in the same great deep state shell game dialogue. And that's going to come out, and when it does, people are instantly going to see the government under the Obama people were trying to cover all this up since 2012, and they've never stopped, and it really will implode them like never before. Jim?
In this field of more than 20 Democrats, Tulsi stands out. She's the one who's distinctive. She's a non-interventionist. She has sensible attitudes. I'm only concerned about her gun control views, where I'm hoping to educate her about the defensive use of guns, whether between 500,000 and 3 million defensive use of guns that have saved over 150,000 lives per year. I've invited her to come on my show, Scott, and I specifically sent her a link to the article about the defensive use of guns, because I think if she could understand the role of the Second Amendment, that she could be a sensation, a wonderful candidate for the country. Michael J.
Right on.
Thank you. I agree. And I want Tulsi Gabbard to know that there are 3 veterans plus Don Gren that would support her and bring her on the program to encourage America to do the right thing. And like Scott said before, this election is Mr. Trump's to lose. If he continues his Zionist-inspired adventurism in the Middle East, he will not continue to hold on to the hearts of the American people. I think the Obama administration is being exposed, and this is why you see Clapper and Brennan coming out, because there was a massive use of intel gathering that was illegal, unlawful, unconstitutional, violating the rights of millions of Americans, and it was exposed by Maxine Waters. It's called The Hammer. And now that very information it can be used against them. And they are doing the dissimulation two-step here, but it's not going to work. And I think that Michael LaVaughn Robinson, the husband of Barack Obama, needs to be also charged with fraud, because this person went along with promoting and taking taxpayer money based on the fraudulent candidacy of a non-American citizen for presidency. And Mr. LaVaughn Robinson knows that. Okay, the reality is that creature was involved in stealing millions of dollars of American taxpayer funding on her junkets, on her junkets, on its junkets. I don't know. The reality is that creature was part of the fraud and committing treason against America. Look what America did to stealing the gold of Libya, stealing the gold of the Ukraine. And after they did that in Ukraine, in Libya, and were involved in aggression against Syria, then they started getting backed up by reports like Scott Bennett's report, which reached Russia. And right after that, coincidentally, Russia started intervening in Syria. And Russia was being supported by the people that know the truth about protecting the people in Crimea. But the Zionist globalist agenda was always about putting sanctions on Russia for doing what was morally right. Well, there's something wrong with this picture. And the issue is, I believe that what we're seeing right now is that the crimes that were committed against the American people by this hammer and the other intel agencies using blackmail to try to manipulate the court and manipulate people in the Republican Party, this is going to come out, and we're going to see charges of treason. Jim?
Good. All good.
Yep.
Chelsea Manning, ordered to return to jail, says she'd rather starve to death than testify. This woman has a lot of balls. Former Army intelligence analyst and whistleblower Chelsea Manning is being sent back to jail today following the arrival of a new grand jury in an ongoing WikiLeaks case for which Manning was ordered to testify and refused. Manning spent 62 days in jail over the course of the last 2.5 months for her initial refusal, and she only got out last week on a technicality related to the expiration of the prior grand jury's term. Now, with a new grand jury in place for the case, which is under the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia, U.S. District Judge Tony Trenga has again found Manning in civil contempt for refusing to testify and says more jail time may sway her decision. However, Manning was adamant that spending more time in jail would not change her mind. She told reporters outside the courthouse this afternoon she would rather starve to death than reverse course and participate in the trial. The government cannot build a prison bad enough, cannot create a system worse than the idea that I would ever change my principles. Manning has asserted her right to remain silent, in part because of the federal government's insistence that portions of the WikiLeaks trial remain sealed and kept from the public. Manning may be out of jail when a new grand jury term starts, but Tenga may also begin imposing fines to coerce her into testifying. Those fines could start at $500 a day and increase to as much as $1,000 a day after a 60-day period. The case itself is shrouded in secrecy, which is partly why Manning is refusing to testify. Believed to be related both to Assange's ongoing extradition to the U.S. and potential WikiLeaks broader operations over the last decade. Manning's involvement may be a tool to bring more charges against Assange, who is presently facing one count of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion for aiding Manning in accessing classified documents, but it's unclear at this time why exactly the government is seeking her involvement beyond her dealings with Assange in 2010 that ultimately led to the leaking of Afghanistan and Iraqi war logs. Manning was convicted under the Espionage Act of 1917 and sentenced to 35 years, for which she served 7 until former President Barack Obama commuted her sentence, which was a good thing for him to have done. Meanwhile, they're trying to keep a lid on the Las Vegas fantasy event, where MGM may pay $800 million in Las Vegas shooting settlement casino giant MGM Resorts has told regulators in the U.S. it may pay up to $800 million to settle liability lawsuits stemming from the 2017 mass shooting in Las Vegas. This would basically be hush money. We know, in fact, that they played a pre-recorded soundtrack over the PA system coordinated with special effects, that no shots were actually fired, that the Crowds on Demand was recruiting crisis actors 15 days in advance for this completely staged event. Scott and I have done interviews about it. Everything about it is fake. What, after all, does MGM do? It makes movies. Las Vegas was a movie. MGM Resorts has said it has a $751 million in insurance to pay towards settlements. A lawyer handling mediation called it premature for the corporate owner to report a possible settlement range between $735 million and $800 million, not even close. You say represent 4,200 claimants. This is just ridiculous. But this is what happens from these absurd cases of having masses of crisis actors that you then have to pay hush money to keep quiet. MGM Resorts has defended itself against liability, raging victims last summer when it filed lawsuits against more than 1,900 people in a bid to consolidate claims in one federal court. The plaintiffs are seeking compensation for a range of physical and psychological harm after a gunman rained fire from the Mandalay Bay suite into an open-air concert crowd, killing 58 and wounding more than 800, all of which is false and fabricated. We know, for example, not only was the soundtrack a pre-recorded machine gun fire being played over the PA system, there was a simulated flashing light on the fourth floor in the middle of the Mandalay Bay to simulate machine gun fire. It higher up 3 light blasts. We know in the crowd there was a guy turned to fire in the crowd. You could see the flash from his barrel. No one was shot because he was using blanks. We have photographs of transferring bodies from a private funeral home to an ambulance to be presented as victims at Las Vegas. And Telehub thought it had found a massacre within the massacre with 17 ambulances in front of Hooters in Las Vegas. But inside footage show a whole lot of bored crisis actors, each with their own sheet, waiting to be taken out as a stretcher as additional victims of a non-existent shooting massacre. Embarrassingly bad. Meanwhile, WordPress.com has taken down Jon Rappaport's blog. This is a brilliant guy. I've reprinted many of his blogs. There's a purge underway on the WordPress.com platform. Anyone dealing with controversial topics has to self-host. It doesn't mean your hosting provider will terminate you, but you have a much better chance of remaining up than on any of the major blogging and social media platforms. Here's Jon Rappaport himself reporting on May 11th, 2019, WordPress suddenly took down my blog after 10 years of continuous operation. There was no warning or advance notice of any kind. Scott.
Well, MGM, Jim, I think we did forensic analysis that proved that it is scientifically impossible for the amount of bullets to have been fired and not have the gun bullet casings all over the room, not having the hallways splintered. Of course, we've exposed that the body and the laying of the bullets on top of the blood rather than having the blood on top of the bullets, which would have been logical. And the laying down of the rifle over the man's left leg as he laid on his back is physically impossible. It indicates a setup. The entire event was a setup. The entire event was a false flag, if you will. There's been talk of Saudi Arabia, Hillary Clinton at the time, and Obama having this orchestration to allow Mohammed bin Salman to come up and solidify his power. He was arresting princes at the time. What needs to happen, of course, is an amicus brief, friend of the court brief needs to be filed by multiple people saying this was a fraud, and the court has a duty, a responsibility under the Constitution, sua sponte, to investigate it, but under no circumstances should any insurance company be defrauded into paying this, because every insurance policy holder is going to have their policies increase to pay for these payouts. That's the same thing in California. All of these fires that were started by PG&E and others, they're now passing the costs of PG&E's disintegration to the taxpayers in California. So when they do these lawsuits and they do these payouts, the average citizen is the one that is violated. And that's why they have standing to file in court a legal filing that this is all fraud, it's wire fraud, it's corruption, and all sorts of criminal investigations should be entered in. Jim?
Thank you. Very good. Very good. Michael J.
Jim, I don't want you to be offended because I'm going to speak my piece and I'm going to speak the truth. Mr. Manning is not a woman. Mr. Manning was born a man. What I believe we're seeing is that this person has been subjected to torture in prison, subjected to psychological violence. And Scott can talk about this with respect to this kind of person having a great intelligence, but being emotionally crushed with what he was seeing. This is why he began sending files to expose the criminality, the torture, the inhumanity, the crimes against humanity and the war crimes. And when he was subjected to torture, I believe what was occurring was that he was actually involved in a multiple personality disorder, a dissociative identity disorder from what was called trauma-based mind control in the prisons. And what we see is an alternate personality called Chelsea. It is a feminine personality, but the core of his being is actually still a man. And he was biologically identified as a male in gender in his birth. And the reality is many people right now that have been involved with DID situations. There are many people with multiple personalities that have been caused by our government under the CIA, under Operation MKUltra. And this is a well-established fact that people can have different personalities come up with different sexes. But lawfully, the reality for that, like Canada is doing, requiring people, to pay fines to go to prison if they use the wrong gender in addressing someone. This is about the psychological and moral destruction of a culture and a culture's language by manipulating and creating a false reality. Now, the issue for me is that there were no death certificates. We couldn't get through to the coroner in Las Vegas. The hospitals said, no, you must be talking, we've got no people shot here. You must be talking about the exercise that's going on down there. And then we've got people that, how many people have been paid off already, Jim, with the millions of dollars paid off, like you said, like the sheriffs that retired and all that, to cover up this massive psychological operation, this propaganda operation that was facilitated and legalized under Obama with the destruction of the Smith-Mundt Act, preventing this kind of false flag manipulation of the American people, creating a sense of terror for disarming the American people and overthrowing the Constitution they took an oath to protect.
Yeah, the point I was making, Michael J., is that we all know Chelsea Manning was Bradley Manning. My understanding has been there was a surgical change of his genitalia, and that my point was, even if that had happened, she still has a lot of balls. That was my point.
Okay, brother.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Facebook admits, guess what? An Israeli social manipulation company spent $800,000 to influence African elections. Keeping with her spectacular repudiation of violating privacy and rigging elections, Facebook has said it removed hundreds of accounts from Facebook and Instagram that were used to influence elections in Africa. It wasn't Russia, however, behind the latest intervention, but Israel. Archimedes Group, an Israeli company, reportedly spent more than $800,000 in advertising, far more than the Kremlin allegedly spent on its ad campaign to crush Hillary Clinton and get Trump elected, which was $4,700, according to the CEO, chief executive of Google, who testified to Congress about as much as he spends on an elaborate brunch for his own officials and his company, and ran accounts that had nearly 3 million followers for the purpose of targeting African elections. The group primarily targeted Nigeria, Senegal, Togo, Angola, Niger, and Tunisia. For perspective, the $800,000 reportedly spent by the group compares to the $100,000 that's been claimed by the U.S. mainstream to have been spent for Russian bots using allegedly used to sway the 2016 presidential election, which sounds to me like a vastly exaggerated figure. The company used fake accounts to run pages, disseminate their content, and artificially increase engagement, representing themselves as locals, including local news organization, publishing allegedly leaked information about politicians. Facebook's Nathaniel Gletcher, the company's head of cybersecurity, said individuals behind this network attempted to conceal their identities. Surprise, surprise. This organization and all its subsidiaries are now banned from Facebook. It's been issued a cease and desist letter. The group's presence included on Facebook and Instagram, 65 Facebook accounts, 161 pages, 23 groups, 12 events, and 4 Instagram accounts. Followers, about 2.8 million accounts followed one or more of these pages. About 5,500 accounts joined at least one of these groups, and around 920 people followed one or more of these Instagram accounts. Advertising, around 812,000 in spending for ads on Facebook paid for in Brazilian reals, Israeli shekels, and US dollars. The first ad ran in December 2012, the most recent April 2019 events. 9 events were hosted by these pages. The first was scheduled for October 2007, the most recent for May of 2019. Up to 2,900 people expressed interest in at least one of them. A portion of their accounts were previously identified and disabled as fake. We cannot confirm whether any of these events actually occurred. Meanwhile, a positive development, iPhone owners can sue Apple, the Supreme Court rules. A group of iPhone owners accusing Apple of violating U.S. antitrust rules because of its App Store monopoly can sue the company, the Supreme Court ruled. Justice Brett Kavanaugh and the majority said that when retailers engage in unlawful anti-competitive conduct that harms consumers, people buying those companies' products have the right to hold the business to account. That's why we have antitrust law, Kavanaugh wrote. The court's 4 liberal justices joined Kavanaugh in the 5-4 decision. Apple does not allow customers to download apps from any other source than iTunes App Store. Unlike Android, iOS customers can only get apps from that official source, which Apple says serves as a kind of quality control to weed out security threats in apps that violate the company's terms of service. Meanwhile, zombie load. New critical flaw affects most Intel processors, exposes keys, browsing history, and more. Researchers have found another security flaw in the Intel processor chips that power most of the world's computers, one that can compromise users' private data and that can't be fixed without a major performance drop. The exploit, dubbed zombie load, is embedded in Intel's processor chips themselves. This is obviously intentional, meaning even the best designed software patches can only go part of the way toward plugging the hole without reducing chip performance. The vulnerability may allow attackers to resurrect critical data processed by the chip, from browser history and passwords to disk encryption keys and other system-level sensitive data. I have no doubt they're doing that in my lawsuit with Leonard Posner. They're following every keystroke I make on my computer. The reach isn't even limited to the end user's computer, according to researchers Michael Schwartz, Moritz Lipp, and Daniel Gruss from Graz University of Technology and Joe Van Buch from KU Leuven. It can also be exploited in the cloud. Intel claims there's no evidence zombie load was exploited by real-world actors, but as the researchers explain, because it's a hardware vulnerability, attackers who use it may not leave the traces of outside interference found with typical software exploits. It's also unlikely such activity would be caught by an antivirus program, though secondary attacks that use it to invade a user's system might set off alarms. Intel has reportedly addressed the problem at the hardware level in its newest processors while releasing microcode and software updates to patch older chips. Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Mozilla have all issued their own patches, but some users might have to brace for as much as a 40% reduction in performance. Zombie load was discovered by the same researchers who uncovered the notorious Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities in 2017, a finding that shook the computer world's sense of security to its core. Meltdown affected almost every processor Intel had ever manufactured, going back to the mid-1990s. Spectre which provided more difficult to batch, proved even more difficult to batch even at the software level, also afflicted Intel's competitors, including AMD and ARM, which manufacture chips for smartphones and other Internet of Things devices. Savvy users were forced to reconsider the wisdom of cloud computing, even if they patched their own machines or data was only as safe as the processors the cloud providers provided. Here we have David Icke speaking truly, wake up and smell the fascism, all about the internet censorship taking place, the massive abuse of the American public by the social media giants. Wake up and smell the fascism indeed. Scott.
Well, you know, Jim, it's unique because we've exposed a lot of truth on our YouTube pages that have been shut down, on our Facebook pages that have been shut down. The most recent one that I justify filing a class action lawsuit against YouTube for was the New Zealand shooting, in which we proved beyond a shadow of doubt that the forensic evidence indicates the impossibility of bullets being fired into human bodies, and the absence of the typical trauma and reactions indicate there were blanks fired that are corroborated with the physical evidence, or the absence of physical evidence, into the walls and the floor and things of that nature. So YouTube, in shutting down our websites for promoting and telling that truth, as well as telling the truth of the fascism of confiscating and throwing people in jail for 10 to 14 years if they have this video, which shows is evidence against the perpetrators of it. YouTube is now going to be sued for aiding and abetting and conspiring to participate in a crime. This is a fraud. This is a crime. This needs to be challenged in courts of law, with people going in sua sponte, demanding the courts investigate, and us going in representing ourselves, saying my rights have been violated. They shut down my page. They damaged me. And that's the only way to really go back and fight. And I think all of this that is now coming out is going to spur those actions. Jim?
Michael J. Mute. Unmute, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. I was cogitating while you guys were making such excellent points, and I forgot to unmute. Now, the issue right here that we see is that it's been evident that the government has, I believe, been a part of having these breaches in these chips. I believe that the government actually has a mandate that they can get in with backdoors and control everything that's going on. This is part of the total surveillance culture that we're in, and I believe that the people that wind up paying the price are the manufacturers and having to re-engineer these things. Will they be able to re-engineer it without the same kind of access that the government is demanding? They demanded it of Apple. They've demanded it of other groups in phones, and we remember John McAfee refusing to go along with it, and others. The issue that we see is this government is predatory. It doesn't serve the people it demands to be served. It demands total surveillance and control. And this is about Americans standing up, because we can look at this as, oh, they're too strong for us, or we can say, no, the truth is what is necessary to promote here, the defense of our rights under the Constitution, and these people are doing things contrary to law. It is a spiritual problem. For those that understand what I'm talking about, they know how to pray. But I'm looking at the fact that we have a sense of hopelessness that must be overthrown, because this is part of the demoralization of America. It has been the Zionists that were hired by Mark Zuckerberg to come in with agents, that is hundreds and hundreds of censors that have been working to make sure nobody tells the truth. And if they are telling the truth, they're going to be accused of violating community standards. My Facebook page, I'm in Facebook jail right now. My Twitter has been shut down without any explanation because of the truth. And the issue is what we're looking at is there are people who have an allergic reaction to truth. They will never be able to handle the truth because their whole life is a lie. And we're dealing with people who hate people that value the truth more than getting over on other people. Jim?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Meanwhile, we have Joe Biden saying the Second Amendment doesn't mean you're entitled to own a gun. How bad is this? The 2020 presidential campaign season has already begun. New Hampshire, like Iowa, is an early primary state. That's why Joe Biden went to New Hampshire last Monday and Tuesday, May 13th through 14th, 2019, blabbering about restoring the working class in America. But Biden also said something that should alarm every gun owner. Unreported by other media, A.W.R. Hawkins of Breitbart is the only reporter of the 6 to 7 other media accounts I've read who took note of this. In Hawkins' words, former Vice President Joe Biden admitted that the Second Amendment exists, but stressed during his speech in New Hampshire on Tuesday that it does not say everyone is entitled to own a gun. Biden, who was taking questions at a small outdoor venue, also spoke about past gun bans he supported. He specifically referenced the 1994 assault weapons ban and noted it was also limited the number of bullets in a clip. Additionally, he spoke about being former President Obama's point man for gun control following the December 14, 2012 attacks on Sandy Hook Elementary School. He said there's so many things we can do to make schools safer other than arming teachers. He did not specify, however, what those other things are. Rather, he pivoted to the next question. Indeed, point man on Sandy Hook, apparently much more than that. Anonymous published on June 22nd, 2017. In November 2012 on the PBS show Greater Boston, hosted then by Emily Rooney, the daughter of Andy, had as guest the mayor of Boston, Thomas Menino. The topic was gun control, and Menino essentially bragged that he was good friends with then Vice President Joe Biden, who had called him and told Menino that by January 2013, gun control in the U.S. would be a done deal. Rooney asked how or what could change for legislation to pass so quickly. Menino wouldn't say, but that Biden assured him something would happen to bring it about. Obviously, Sandy Hook. Meanwhile, my Posner versus Fetzer lawsuit continues. My defendants' proposed undisputed findings of facts are available online. After filing defendants' plural motion for summary judgment on 30 April, I received a letter from the court advising me that I could not speak for my co-defendants and otherwise would be practicing law without a license, that I had to supplement my motion with a declaration of proposed undisputed findings of fact before the court could consider it. So I filed both an errata to change my submission to defendant's singular motion for summary judgment and the following proposed undisputed findings of fact, which I hope will be sufficient to decide the case without having to go to trial. For those in need of a primer, as I explained in the Sandy Hook Posner versus Fetzer lawsuit for dummies, 8 January 2019, also on my blog at jamesfetzer.org, the man who calls himself Leonard Posner and poses as the father of a child said to have died at Sandy Hook has sued me for defamation for describing the death certificate he gave to Kelly Watt, above left, as a fabrication. He claims that since the state of Connecticut has certified a death certificate, above right, that does not differ in any material respect, I have defamed him. Follow the facts I've submitted to the court and then decide for yourself, where I have argued, of course, in response that if indeed the death certificate certified by the court does not differ in any material respect from the death certificate I've described as a fabrication, then the state of Connecticut has certified a fabricated death certificate, which is itself a crime. Meanwhile, there are 5 million AR-15s in the country, but only 5 have been used in mass shootings. They were all fake cases to demonize AR-15s, which are by far the most effective weapon that people could use to defend themselves against tyranny or threats of foreign invasion. Sandy Hook, Orlando, Parkland, Las Vegas, all of which were fake and were attributed to AR-15s in an effort to demonize the weapon. It turns out, in fact, that 4 times the number of children were killed in schools in the 1990s than today. This is stunning. With all, a report by the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Justice Programs titled School Safety by the Numbers concludes school crime rates have in fact decreased and not increased over time. This was from 1992-93 through 2014-15. Meanwhile, as I never tire of explaining, it is false to believe that gun ownership increases homicide rates. The effect is precisely the opposite. Although the U.S. and Canada have the highest gun ownership in the world, they have the lowest homicide rate. Brazil has low gun ownership, high homicide rate. Africa, low gun ownership, high homicide rate. Russia, low gun ownership, high homicide rate. So you have the choice, high gun ownership or high homicide rate, because with high gun ownership comes a low homicide rate, and with low gun ownership comes a high homicide rate. I just comment on the Second Amendment. It's not well understood. The Founding Fathers debated about the best way for the people to resist the tyranny of the federal government. They thought it was by having strong state militias, where a militia refers to citizen soldiers collectively. They believed that if the states had strong rights for citizen soldiers, they could defend the states individually against tyranny of the federal government. This has to be understood. Hence, we have a better understanding of the amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, of which we now have 50. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. As fundamental as it gets. This is essential to the integrity of the United States, to America as a nation. Scott.
Well, you know, we're witnessing a meltdown in so many different aspects of the American Constitution and freedom, and cyberspace, and the tyrannical police state, and the suppression of ideas, as well as a lot of the political correctness that is saturating America, and it's highlighting in this stripping of Americans' ability to defend themselves. And for the interest of time, I'm going to stop, because I know we want some other things you want to talk about, Jim. The American public will never surrender their guns, and the last people on planet Earth that will ever surrender, or they will never surrender, but they'll die fighting, are the American people. There's no one more warrior in their instincts and their character since 1776 that will stand up and fight. Not all of them. A lot of the Antifa, leftist, lunatic, roadkill, homosexual, transgender, schizophrenics, they're waiting to be thrown into the pit. But those of us who are not of that, those of us who are salt and light, will continue to glow brighter and brighter until the end. And the Second Amendment and the First Amendment are our weapons for doing so. And I think a renaissance in America is going to be ushered in on the Civil War, which we are already on. Go ahead, Jim.
Michael J., I'm going to invite you to comment on the next story, which gives an opportunity to sum up, in the interests of time consideration, Dave Hodges, the 3 stages of a revolution. The alt media will soon be gone, along with Trump and the Constitution. Most people in this country fail to recognize where they are with regard to history. The majority do not see that we are already in a state of rebellion, a civil war, if you will. However, most people, if they heard these words, would believe that it is the average American that will be involved in a civil war, and they would be wrong. Today, the rebellion has to do with the deep state and their followers who are rebelling against the legitimate authority, namely the U.S. government and its people. This is the George Soros who are in a state of rebellion. There are 3 stages associated with a rebellion. Stage 1, the first stage of a revolution. This is a war of ideas and a campaign for the truth. Certainly, fake news is at the center of this. The Russian collusion delusion also fits into this paradigm. State 1 is about the control of the narrative. Where I see the enemy at the gate, most of my friends and neighbors are sleeping through the unfolding attack. We're in a war of words, and if we fail to use our words to awaken all of humanity, we are hopelessly lost, and the globalists will carve us up for dinner. There is indeed strength in numbers, and if we are unable to wake up our fellow countrymen, we will negate the only true tactical advantage that the people enjoy, which is ideological solidarity from a numerically superior force. It should now make sense to you as to why 98% of the media is controlled by globalist-controlled business interests consisting of 5 mega corporations, who in turn are controlled one way or another by the members of the Federal Reserve. In order to win this fight, we need more people speaking out, making videos, and calling MSM talk shows. We especially need to reach the police and the military in order to remind them of their constitutional duty to protect the people against a tyrannical government. But this is not what we are seeing. Our counter to the control of the MSN is to exclusively support the alternative media. If the deep state is successful in taking down the alternative media, then it will become necessary to enact the type of committees of correspondence apparatus similar to what our founding fathers did in the pre-Revolutionary War period in our history. On-the-ground communication is timeless, effective, and very difficult for totalitarian government to negate. Stage 2 of the revolution. Stage 2 consists of civil disobedience. We are seeing stage 1 globalist tactics bleed over to this stage even before the coup to take down Trump is complete. This stage has to do with George Soros and paid protesters. This is about a contrived, racially motivated civil war. America has gone from a republic to a police state in less than a generation. The evidence for this transformation is as follows, and it's been a long time coming. The previous passage of the John Warner Defense Bill removed all the firewalls between the people in subjugation by federally controlled troops. A scant few spoke out and nobody resisted. Can you say FEMA camps, the passage of the NDAA eliminated all due process as it permitted the administration to arrest and indefinitely detain any American without due process? This is what makes a James-held political red list extractions legal and subsequent population relocation legal. A scant few broke out and nobody resisted. Obama's declaration through Executive Order 13603 proclaiming the authority to seize control over any and all assets in the country and to invoke slave labor at his whim. When the liberals reclaim the presidency in 2020, EO 13603 will prominently figure in our collective history. A scant few will speak out and nobody will resist. This is the blueprint for the total takeover of the U.S. Should the globalists ever recapture the White House, and they will in 2020 as the backbone of the patriot movement, the independent media will soon be gone, and so will Trump. 4, red flag laws that can seize your guns without due process. Any totalitarian regime can cut the legs out of a revolution by disarming the people. A scant few will speak out and nobody will resist. Stage 3, all-out roar. A successful revolution cannot simply jump to stage 3 without having progressed for the first 2 stages, and this is a strategy of the globalists as they're dragging the people to the battlefield of their choice. When Stalin's forces were dragging a third of the Russians out of their homes, it was too late for the Russians to fight back because the ideological basis of resistance in a sense of collective action through civil disobedience had not been built. This was the Stalinist objective of the previous Jade Helm operation, which told us what was coming, but the nation did not listen. The Russian people were defeated by Stalin because they did not win stage 1 of the revolution. We desperately need to heed this lesson from history and embark on a tireless crusade to wake up our country to the dangers that lie ahead. And even if the people are sufficiently awakened, it does not guarantee victory of any kind, unless, of course, the bravado crowd has stored direct energy weapons in their basements. Therefore, it is the duty of every awake American to educate their neighbors, family, and friends, whether they want to hear the truth or not. Remember, any kind of resistance to tyranny will not succeed unless there is an attitude of defiance toward the tyrants. Tyranny requires minions to carry out their tyranny. Education about the present tyranny can lessen the size of the potential minion pool. Again, this is accomplished in stage 1, and we are almost out of time. People frequently ask me if I think we can mount an effective resistance, and I respond, the odds are really against the people. This fact should not keep people from resisting with every fiber of their being. Further, resistance can evolve into adaptation, and this could save the lives of your family. Conclusion, stage 1 is about regaining control of the White House with a globalist president. This is why Trump faces either assassination or impeachment on fake charges. The newest allegation that Trump is a racist who committed tax fraud is part of this fraud against the people. Even though Trump was exonerated by Mueller, the Democrats are keeping alive in the people's mind that he was guilty. Stage 1 is nearly complete. Stage 2 is underway, and our Constitution and people as a whole are under attack. When Trump is out of the way, stages 2 and 3 will commence with a vengeance. If one wonders why I fight so hard against tyranny, you have learned the reasons. Mike Pence is a globalist. He will make an excellent transition president. In the meantime, are you prepared so you and your family can adapt? They came for the independent media and nobody said anything. Then they came for the president and nobody said anything. Then they came for our guns and nobody said anything. Then they came for you and all your defenses were gone. I therefore conclude, when they come for our guns, the time has come to use them. If, Michael J., there's a moment that remains, I invite you to comment.
Well, 1 minute, quick.
Thank you. We really need to turn back to God as a nation. We have to ask God, as the word of God says, behold, our enemies are stronger than we are, but you are our very present help in time of trouble. God bless America.
Thank you. Thank you. Don, take us out.
Oh, boy. Take us out. Oh, well, you said so much today. I mean, you better watch this a couple times to get it all in, folks, because this is tremendous information that you need to stand up for your rights in this end times of trial here. So I want to thank you. What time we at? Yes. So thanks again for watching Truth versus News here for May 20th. And may we stand up for what's right and realize that if truth is politicized as it is, all is lost. So we really got to stand up for what is right here. And thank you so much for standing with us and watching and sharing. So I'll just say adios and thank you again for a tremendous program, guys. Oh, wow, wow, wow. Okay, adios.